I think the first thing I wanted to just show everyone that's watching in the chat room and so on and so forth is just probably a lot of this stuff is boring to a lot of you, but some people probably don't know the kinds of lighting units that we do use in the film business, and many in multitude, and we just have a very small selection of them at this end. Going to start. Basically, this is a very small HMI. I think this is a 200 watt power. 400. See, I'm being corrected already. They take a little bit of time to warm up these, but basically their daylight balance 5600K. They're incredibly efficient compared to tungsten lamps such as this. They throw out a hell of a lot more light per watt than. As you can see, when they first start to come up, they're sort of fairly greenish, and for some very bizarre reason, the smaller they are, the longer they take to warm up. I've never figured that one out. But you can obviously put correction gel on them to change them to tungsten lighting, but that's not something I like doing. I don't know why, it's just a personal preference. I don't like doing that very much, but they work very nicely in a studio such as this. These are brilliant for documentary or low-budget films because you can plug them into household outlets. One of the issues with HMIs is that they always come with boxes that you trip over called ballasts, which I think what they do is to convert the voltage into regular household voltage into a very, very high frequency and high voltage pulse, I believe. Is that correct? I mean, it's basically inside here, it's an arc, and so to create an arc, you need a much higher voltage than 120, so it's basically to do with that. I'm not an electrical engineer, but that's basically what they do. Don't need to bother switching this one on, but this is basically a big brother. This is a 1.2 kilowatt HMI, and so again, you can basically plug this into a household outlet without worrying about blowing your fuses and so on and so forth. So these sorts of lamps are very useful for going to locations where you don't have a generator, where you're making maybe an interview, a documentary, or even a small film in a small location, and you can't afford a generator or you can't break into the power supply. Again, a ballast, which provides the very, very high frequency and high voltage pulse that basically operates on an arc inside there. Sort of more prone to problems, HMIs, because they're full of very complicated electronics. So in damp weather, they can be a little bit difficult to use. Things like that. Moving on. I'll actually go right the way over to here. This is a very, very tiny, what we call a Fresnel lamp. And basically, it's probably the most common lamp that's used in the entire film industry. Not this particular size, but Fresnel lamps are the same basic construction from this right the way up to a 24 kilowatt tungsten lamp. They just expand proportionally, and they're called Fresnel because they have what they call a Fresnel lens in here, which basically is a piece of glass that's cut into concentric rings that simulate a convex lens. So basically you have the abilities to spot and flood them. You have barn doors for controlling them. You have wires, nets, scrims to basically control intensity, so on and so forth. So that's your Fresnel lamp. Very useful for projecting somewhat. You can, when you spot them in, you can throw the light further across the set and make it brighter, and the range is really, quite extreme. This is a 650 watt, which is almost the same wattage as this. I think these are 800s, aren't they? Are these 800s? Is that a 1K? Okay. Basically, this is just an open face quartz light, and does the same kind of thing, but it's not as precisely designed as the Fresnel lamp, which focuses the light much better. It's a much cruder kind of light source, and but very good bang for the buck. You get an awful lot of light coming out of these for what they are. I mean, you know, again, it's a tungsten lamp. It's not HMI, and I use these a lot for just you know, just putting light into a ceiling or into a corner, or you know, and I also use them a lot for diffusion because they're quite efficient in terms of light output per watt if I'm not using HMIs. So there's that, and then a lot of people love these lamps, which is a Kino Flow. This is a 32. You can get Kino Flows balanced for daylight, 5600, or for tungsten, which is this. It's balanced for tungsten, 3200K. And people use these an awful lot. You use them a lot for illuminating green screens, blue screens. They have an incredible throw to them. They're incredibly efficient in terms of power. I don't particularly like them for lighting the human face. I don't think, you know, but again, that's just personal taste. A lot of people love them for that. I just happen to be preferring tungsten light to, you know, studio balanced tungsten lighting to Kino Flows. Again, these are not continuous spectrum lights, whereas these are. And I'd love somebody, if there's anybody in a chat room anywhere that knows whether these are continuous spectrum. I suspect they're not. I think they're not continuous spectrum HMIs. So that's, and then this little guy here, this is an elliptoidal spot, and it's focusable. It's got a lens in it, and you can focus it. You can basically do all kinds of things with this. Just point it up here. It's got blades, so you can control how much of the light you use. You can use it. What I love these lamps for is they're very useful for example, a lot of the locations that you go to, people don't like you to put things on their ceilings and screw into ceilings or beams and things like this. So you can very easily get a little bit of separation on the back of an actor's head, a hair light, for example, by basically projecting this onto something so lightweight that you can just literally attach it to a ceiling with a piece of painter's blue tape and just create a little source anywhere. Or you could even, I mean, I went to a place with a very fancy painted ceiling where we weren't allowed to do anything, and you know, there's always a solution. Again, thinking outside the box, all we did was to literally fill the whole ceiling up with party balloons, white party balloons, and then bounce light off it, and the party balloons obviously wouldn't do any damage to the ceiling. And then when we finished the job, we just put a little spike on a piece of wood and took them all down, and so we were able to create a really very, very nice soft fill on a ceiling where people would get very irritated if you started attaching big clamps and things like that. So, you know, these are all the kind of tools that can help you do things like that. We're going to start demonstrating all these lights after lunch. Once we get into creating a little scene and how we go about doing some coverage. But I'd like to take questions on any of the light fixtures you see.
Is what makes it a Kino Flow the fact that it uses the tubes, the fluorescent tubes? Like what makes it a Kino Flow?
Yeah, I mean, Kino Flows, they have created most fluorescent lights you see in supermarkets and in general domestic situations, they don't really care very much about the color quality of them, and you tend to find that they have an awful lot of green in them, and also they work at a certain frequency. Kino Flows are very carefully constructed so that the phosphors inside the tube really do create something that's very, very close to daylight or to tungsten, and I believe the frequency is much higher than via this box is much higher than regular fluorescent tubes, so that you don't get any kind of flicker effect. If you're shooting on a HD DSLR in somewhere like a supermarket, and you're on a 50th, which you might be tempted to be if you're shooting at 24 frames, you'll often see dark bands moving very slightly down the image, and that's because your camera's not in sync with the 60 cycle power supply. So you need to correct that by either cranking your shutter speed up to a 60th or down to a 30th, and then you'll see that disappear because they become in sync.
One of the things you don't like about that is that you're trying to capture texture in the skin and that it flattens it out?
Again, it's a personal taste. I mean, a lot of people use them because I believe they're even more efficient than HMIs at the amount of light output per watt. So they're incredibly useful for, sort of run and grab interview type situations where you go to interview someone that's only going to give you 10 minutes and you can run in with these lights, plug them in quickly into the power and, and get something that looks really quite attractive. I don't know, I just feel robbed of the fact that it's not a continuous spectrum. And I love tungsten light because it is a continuous spectrum. I mean, my favorite light of all time is something that you hardly ever see anymore, which is a carbon arc. And they were the lights that were used most traditionally up to about the 60s or 70s in the big studios, but they're environmentally horribly unfriendly. They basically are two carbon rods that basically are fed into each other to create an arc of just like arcing two power supplies together. And the carbon burns down slowly and it's fed automatically by the mechanism inside the lamp. And they were the traditional lamps that lit all the big Hollywood movies in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. And the trouble is that in studios they emit quite a lot of carbon dioxide and sort of smoke and dust and things that are environmentally unfriendly. It's one of the things that sort of in an effort to become green, which is a very honourable kind of thing, we've actually suffered the loss of some rather beautiful devices. I think, for example, there is nothing that can match a cathode ray tube television. I think plasmas are kind of okay, but when you compare a $9,000 plasma TV screen to a $50,000 cathode ray tube, which is what we used to do our color timing on in a post house in Hollywood, which almost don't exist anymore. The difference was intense. I mean, the fidelity of color, the quality of the image. And so in this rush to be kind of efficient, in this rush to be green, we've lost a lot of quality. It's kind of almost like the equivalent of, MP3, that we all accept now. I mean, it's really, it's okay, but it's not, the conductor of the world's most famous orchestra, if he listens to an MP3 of his music, he's not going to be very happy because there's a lot that's compressed and missing and so on and so forth, and it doesn't have the depth and richness that it should have. But we, in the name of progress, I think sadly we've lost an awful lot of rather wonderful things, and here's a couple of examples.